Okay, we're at that really important time now in the HEFCE programme where we're moving from strategy design, programme design, now we're getting into what I would term the real nitty-gritties. I think, though, perhaps first to step back and think where we are. We've had the first, let's call it the preliminary calls process. And whilst the headline figure will no doubt fall during the appraisal process, I think it was quite remarkable, actually, across England as a whole, particularly in the priority axis for innovation and SME development, we've seen headline figures of up to 40% of the entire 7-year allocation have been bid for. And within that, obviously, there would appear to be a very active contribution and involvement by universities across England. So the headline message, I think, is extremely positive. And I think, okay, the process has had its delays and it's had its problems. But at the end of the day, let's stand back and say to the departments, there's a lot of good work going on, and we're now getting to the point where we're getting ready to enter into the field of success, hopefully. There are some nitty-gritty issues that need to be resolved, and I think it's fair to recognise that we're beginning to see some of those resolved. We've seen recently the updated procurement guidance by CLG. We've seen some of the approved state aid schemes through the general block exemption, again from CLG. We're beginning to see some clarity around some of the procedures. So progress is being made on the administrative side of the programme, but there are a number of sort of administrative issues that need to be resolved over the course of the next few weeks and months. Now, I am aware that work is going on behind the scenes within the departments, and we expect to see some proposals in these areas over the course of the next weeks and months, particularly on the European Regional Development Fund, which, let's be clear, the programme is now approved. Within 3 months of the date of approval, the National Committee must meet formally and we see the formal start of the programme. And then that triggers a whole series of decisions and formalisation of some of the informal discussions that the departments have had with partners over the past year or so. But picking up on some of the comments which are being made by your membership within Universities UK, the areas where I think they'd like to see some good early progress was, first of all, the ESF programme isn't signed off yet. And I think we're looking for some strong signs from particularly the Department of Work and Pensions of when that's likely to happen, because there are a number of partners, and particularly those who deliver a European Social Fund, not necessarily in universities, who are really keen to see that that programme catch up with ERDF, because it is lagging behind a bit. But if we look specifically at the European Regional Development Fund, where are the areas, the nitty-gritties that need to be resolved? Well, working across LEP borders. How do we ensure that the process is smooth as possible? And as activities are selected and prioritised by local partnerships working with CLG, how do we ensure that the accounting and the reporting, particularly of outputs, can be made as simple as possible? And on the issue of outputs, now of course the programme is formally approved, we have the quantum of outputs for the whole of England that's been agreed. And there needs now to be a process of refreshing the local ESIF proposals to apportion those outputs down to the local level. Now that process could be long, it can be difficult. And I think the view from the university sector is that whilst a mathematical apportionment of the outputs in relation to the notional allocations of cash may not necessarily work, superbly in every place, I think a very strong consensus from the sector that actually, to begin with, let's just prorate the outputs, let's get on with it. And if there's any programme management that needs to be done by the managing authority as advised by the National Committee, then that can be done under the normal process of programme management. So I think the sector would rather see, to begin with, a mathematical prorata of outputs. The next issue is confirming the involvement of contributions from the private sector, ironing out any sort of misconceptions, because there's been different approaches in different parts of England in previous programmes. How do we maximise the contribution of the private sector in a way which is compliant with the regulations? And that's particularly important, of course, within both the Priority Access 1, innovation, and 3, and especially for the growth hubs. And we see many universities actively involved both in the design and hopefully one would argue in the delivery of services which are signposted by the growth hubs, where HEFCE will be an important contribution, as will private sector cash. The next most technical issue is we've had the outline process through perhaps the failed use of LocusNet, and I think we'd want to see that sorted out as soon as possible, please. And I know there's real work going on behind the scenes to do that. But now, of course, perhaps being a bit more clarity on the process for the final applications. What's the process and what's a realistic timetable which meets the need of the managing authority to ensure compliance, but at the same time meets the needs of universities who want to get on and spend the cash? So perhaps a discussion about that process, and I rather suspect that will be coming forward to the National Committee. Again, as projects are implemented, the issue of the definitions of the outputs. We've got standard outputs, we know, across the programme, across the whole of England, and indeed most of the outputs are standard across most of the European Union. And many of those detailed definitions are fit for purpose, but there are a number of those definitions where there's a room for vagueness, and I think there's a sector where I'm a little bit concerned that that could lead to problems of audit at a later date. So issues around SMEs assisted. You know, we've had a system in the past in some places. How do we make that standardised and clarified? And again, I know that the departments are working on that. In terms of partnership-based issues, one is the proposal to establish the national committees, ensuring that there's a national dialogue on a thematic basis. Now, Universities UK, some months ago, made nominations from the sector. I think we need to get those up and running and work out, perhaps with a bit more precision, what exactly their role will be, both in the short term and perhaps in the medium term, where it may be necessary to make some difficult decisions about the potential transfer of resources from one place to another if we don't hit the important deadlines under what's called N+3. And I think finally at the local level, we've got ESIF committees now everywhere. We've got university engagement, I think, in all of those ESIF committees, but perhaps a need to, and there's some teeth and troubles as you'd expect, because these are new, but how do we ensure that there is a standardised approach which reflects local circumstances, ensuring that they all work in a broadly similar way, so we don't have, for instance, in one part of England, documents shared freely, in other parts of England, meetings are held behind closed doors, and the documents are held in confidence. So how do we find the best way to have a standardised approach? So those for me are the nitty-gritties. I think they're doable. I think the departments are working quite actively behind the scenes to resolve those issues, and I expect those guidance notes and papers to national committees in the very near future. But I go back to my start. The headline news is very positive. Funding managers will obviously focus on the technical issues, but I think they're manageable. I don't think they're of issues which are unresolvable, and they're certainly not, whilst they're important in the funding process, in terms of the critical path, I think they're not necessarily the number one issue at the moment. Sort of irritating, but manageable. And we look forward to working with the departments to resolve those as quickly as possible.